Welcome to today's basketball podcast. Excited to have longtime basketball immersion member, Coach Sherri Coale of the University of Oklahoma here. Coach Coale, welcome to the podcast, and great to have you here to be able to share the game.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be on with you.
Amazing career, 23 years at the University of Oklahoma, Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, 19 straight NCAA tournament appearances, which is a remarkable consistency, 3 Final Fours. And Coach, the number that stood out to me was 127 academic All-Americans. What an impressive accomplishment for you and your program.
Well, thank you so much for recognizing that. I think way more than the wins and losses, that'll be the thing that makes the most lasting impact. But that's a reflection of a couple of things. It's the kinds of kids that we recruit, and it's also the extended family that we have here at the University of Oklahoma that helps give them the tools that they need to be successful.
Well, and I'm going to tie something back into that a little bit, but I want to start, first of all, I had the opportunity when I was a young high school coach to be able to coach against Stacey Dales. And I remember the first time that I coached against her, and she was such a big part of your program and your early success there at the University of Oklahoma. But when I reflected on coaching against her, I coached St. Mary's Hamilton, and we coached against her at Thousand Islands Brockville. And I just right away when I left that game, I remember turning to my assistant saying, I got to find a new way to cover someone's best player, because she just torched us and she was so good. But
you had your hands full.
We had our hands full.
I can tell you. A quick story about Dales. My assistant coach asked if she could go to Canada looking for a point guard. And this is my first year here at Oklahoma. And I'm like, yeah, we need one desperately. That's fine. She said, well, I got this film on this kid. I want you to watch it. I watched it. I said, this kid's not good enough. She said, well, let me go watch, just maybe in person. She's a little bit better than she is on film. Well, you can go, but I don't think she's the one that's going to get it done. So she goes. It's the days before cell phones. Pam stops on her way back to the airport, says, Coach, I've found the savior. And I'm like, Pam, this kid is not the savior. She's like, no, you're right. That kid wasn't any good. But on the way back to the airport, I heard about this other game that was going on. And I stopped by this gym to watch, and this kid's unbelievable. I said, well, who is it? And she said, well, I don't know. Her name's Stacy. And I'm like, well, is she going somewhere? And she said, I don't think so, but I don't really know. I just started watching the game. And if I stay, I'll miss my flight. I said, stay and figure it out. So she gets in touch with her. It's Dales, and she hasn't committed anywhere. She, I think, had been a little bit injured the year before, so wasn't on the circuit. Not many people knew about her. So I flew out to watch her play, and I remember vividly sitting in the stands, and she was jumping center as the point guard, but she was jumping center. She's 6'2", and before the official even tossed the ball up, I said, I got to coach this kid. There was something about her intensity, her competitive zeal, if you want to call it that, just the way she attacked her position on the floor to go jump for the ball to open the game. I said, I got to coach this kid. And then, probably her first 6 passes went off the wall and hit people in the stands, but I loved it because she could see things. And that's really hard to teach. And I could feel her spirit. I love the way she approached the game, and was very fortunate to be able to sign her and get her here to Oklahoma. And she led us to our first Final Four and a national championship appearance.
Well, again, a tremendous player and tremendous swagger that she had, and something you look for in all players. But Coach, I want to circle back to the education part, because I'm sure there's others, but I think you're one of the few people that I've ever heard talk and refer to your players or athletes as learners. And I've got asked this before, because when I talk or I present, I talk about learners, that I'm teaching learners. And it struck me as how rare that is, but I don't think that should be rare, but that's something that you talk about.
Yeah, our court is our classroom. My background is in high school teaching. When I graduated from high school and went to college, I wanted to be a teacher and a coach. And to me, those two words were synonyms. And I think that the same things that you do in the classroom, you want kids to not memorize things. You don't want them to be robots. You want them to know how to think and navigate. And I taught English. And so the transfer of that is obvious. That you teach a piece of literature that was written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and the lessons translate into our life today. And the same thing happens on the basketball court. I want those guys to be able to take that information that I'm giving them and utilize it in their own specific ways, because we don't need robots. I don't need 5 guys out there playing like I would play. I need 5 guys out there playing in their own unique fingerprint kind of ways. So learning and growing is our mission. Our our mission at the University of Oklahoma is to play in such a way so that people are compelled to watch and inspired to do whatever they do in a better way, period. Most of the time, if you play that way, you win games. But the importance of playing in that way is where we spend all of our time. And then our process, or our purpose, which we talk about daily, is to grow as people and performers in the pursuit of championships. Grow is the operative word. And so that's the connection to learning. We want to fail and screw up and learn and adjust and change and get better and grow. And that's the process. We talk about questioning and wrestling and reaching and falling and getting up and doing it all over again.
I love that. And, and again, I don't know why there's this disconnect, because the basketball court is, as like you said, it's a classroom, and the same techniques and, the same type of learning process that someone would go through an English class, they go through on the basketball court. And the one thing that also struck me when you said that is I remember reading an article that was about you going through this metamorphosis in terms of changing your practice to make it more exciting, to make it more stimulating. And I relate that to English class, thinking the best English teachers made it interesting from really a subject that by and large could be really boring. And I think it's the same for basketball practice. Can you talk about some of the things that you've done to be able to change practice to make it more engaging?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a video I saw, and I'm not certainly not the most current in terms of all this, but there's a video I saw by a guy named Easy Prince where he's talking about that phones have changed through the years, cars have changed through the years. But if you look at the educational setting, our classrooms look a lot like they did 200 years ago. I mean, why aren't we changing as we get more information? And that kind of struck a chord because several years ago, I just started feeling like it had gotten really hard. It had gotten really hard to get my players to understand, to digest, to get their behaviors to translate into live play. And I started struggling with, doing that thing that I asked them to do. I started questioning and wrestling. And how can we get a better ratio of success based on moving from practice to live games? And how can we teach better? And most importantly, how can they learn more? And it changed a lot of things. There were a lot of things, Chris, that I was taught to do in college. I had an incredible opportunity. I played at Oklahoma Christian College, and our men's coach was Dan Hayes, who taught me 90% of everything I know about basketball. Just a tremendous fundamental teacher. If you think of Don Meyer and Dan Hayes were close friends, and that was very much that sort of program. Coach Meyer was a hero of mine. Somebody that I studied very closely, and lots of really, really good things. One of them is teaching with constraints, cutthroat, playing defensive cutthroat, where you get points for deflections and points for steals and 5 points if you take a charge, or offensive cutthroat, no dribble. You can't dribble. Teaches kids to move without the ball. How lucky was I that I had people like that in my basketball life 30 years ago, just doing that. And I grew up knowing, okay, this is what you do. Though I can't say that I ever completely connected the dots as to how innovative and forward thinking that was. I don't know if I had the knowledge to talk about the why behind it at that time, but I did it because the people I admired and respected did it. And because as a college player, I did it and I got better by doing that. So I've been teaching and coaching with constraints for my entire career, high school career and college career. But there are lots of things that we do differently now than we did several years ago. Many of them based on our spending way too much time in what I would now call the chunking process, where we're getting rep after rep after rep. And boy, we look good. Those practices are so pretty. I told it, I had a group of high school coaches in for a coaches clinic a couple weeks ago. And I said, how many of you love star passing drill? It's a thing of beauty from a coach's standpoint when that ball flies around and boy, everybody catches clean and it moves and they sprint. And we feel really good about that. And like it's some sort of reflection on us. I don't think we consciously go about it that way, but subtly, we feel really good about that. It's pretty, it's clean. I'm teaching them fundamentals. This is important. But then if they can't execute that in a game, then what is the power of it? And basketball is so messy. I just feel like if you can solve problems and fix things, you can be a great player, because that's constantly what you have to do when you play the sport, because there are 10 people who are making decisions on the fly and the ball is moving. You can't possibly predict everything. So everything that happens in a slightly different way than it happened when it happened before. And so teaching kids to be agile thinkers and to be flexible and to know when. Boy, Chris, this is a really big deal for me. I think with players I recruit right now, they are so good with the what. You know, they can dribble and pick up cones and turn around backward and spin upside down. And I don't know if they need to be on America's Idol or if they need to be playing basketball, but they can really do some stuff. They've got some what. Even shooters, you know, we got these guns. You can get 1 million shots in hardly no time at all. So we've got some skill. Where the gap is knowing when to use that, how to use it, and why you're using it. It's not the what, it's all that other stuff. And so I think our role as college coaches in our practices, that time has to be committed to the when and the how. And that's what I've tried to design our practices, what I daily grind through and trying to design practices that create environments where our players can do that.
You're speaking my language, and so much of what you said is great. And just going way back to like Don Meyer and coaches like that, there were so many great coaches that were doing things that, again, you or I educationally now would say that was right, based on motor learning, based on skill acquisition. They just didn't know those terms. They didn't know that. They didn't know constraints and, you know, things that shape learning and all those different things. But there's so many coaches that were doing it right. And what I love nowadays is people like you and hopefully people like I are lending a voice to sort of credibility to this, because it's exactly what you said. We both are around coaches that have a hard time, and this is what I'd like you to address, have a hard time changing from something that looks clean to something that looks messy, because the first impression from a parent, administrator, or whoever's watching your practice is you're not doing a good job in practice. They're not doing the drill right. They're not, you know, executing, etc. So what are some of the things that helped you get through that process of understanding that messy is good?
First and foremost, I'm kind of a digger by nature. Like I just want to know, how can we do this better? How can we be more efficient? Let's pick at this, even if it's an entry we're running. Let's pick at it. Let's figure out really what makes it great and not just good. That's just sort of my nature with most things. So every single year I try to tear apart what we're doing and find out what works and what doesn't. About 5-6 years ago, I decided to just hot wash my entire program. Like, let's just put it under a microscope, because when you do a thing for 20 years, you're gathering. And to me, the metaphor is like, if you buy a house from the 60s and the kitchen cabinets have been painted several times, you got to get through all that to get back to the real wood. What really matters here? What's good? And maybe some of it was good and we threw it out, and more likely we've kept a lot of stuff that probably we don't need to do anymore. And so it was like this massive closet clean of our program, everywhere from recruiting to strategy to individual player development to practice organization, everything. And the process was refreshing, enlightening. You have to have a little bit of, no, you have to have a whole lot, Chris, of intestinal fortitude, because you got to look at yourself and be able to laugh sometimes and go, really, why am I doing that? Like, it was probably a really good idea 15 years ago. It looks ridiculous right now. Why are we doing that? So we had to update a whole lot of things. We took out a lot of garbage, and we learned a lot about what we could do better and how. And so that process of it was pretty much in my nature. I think the interesting thing for me has been when people come and watch us practice, sometimes it's as if they don't know what they're seeing. And I got to be okay with that. And maybe even beyond that, I think it's my job as a teacher of teachers to help them understand maybe what they're not seeing. And that's just a learning process, not anything that makes me superior or them inferior. It's just that maybe I've had a chance to learn something that I could then pass on. And that is that messy is not bad. And we tell our kids that. This is what's crazy. As coaches, we tell our kids that all the time because we know that the only way for them to grow is to fail. Anybody who's a parent knows that. And if you are a coach, you know that your player has to try to make that backdoor pass, and it's going to get deflected, and it's going to go out of bounds, and it's going to be ugly 3 or 4 times, and then they're going to get it, and they're going to be really good at it. But they're never going to get exactly when and how to throw that until they screw it up several times. We know that. And so we want our players to fail. But then when we start organizing a practice, we're not always so willing to be in their shoes, to present messiness, to be okay with that. So that's kind of the curve of it, I guess you would say. I can tell you this, though. I have 7 players in our gym right now that are freshmen. So I have 7 18-year-olds in our gym right now. I have 2 19-year-olds and then 3 players that are 20 and beyond. So there's a lot of youth. We have been practicing for, I think today is maybe our 20th practice. And we've done very, very little chunking, lots of small games, lots of what I call controlled possessions, 3 possessions, 2 possessions, a lot of cutthroat, which is where our constraints come in, a lot of guided defense, guided offense, so that we're working on specific things and getting tons of reps at those specific things. And our progression rate compared to years past in terms of things that I would say our young guys are mastering is off the charts. We have moved so much faster. Closeouts is one of those skills. You do 1-on-0 closeouts. You do 1-on-0 closeouts every day. I might, 3 years ago, I might have done 1-on-0 closeouts every day. So they know what the technique looks like, but then somebody blows past them, and in a game we're like, we practice those all the time. No, we don't. We don't practice responding to that. We practice doing the technique. Well, what I found out is kids don't need all that. They figured out how to do it. They're not dumb. 2 reps, they figure out the closeout. Now let's figure out what to do after that closeout based on the million different things that an offensive player could do. And so we keep putting them in those, I call them experiential situations or environments where they get an opportunity to rep all those different things that could happen. And basketball is unpredictable. So one of the reasons that the guided offense and guided defense are so important is if you just play, and this goes back to your original question, which I'm notorious for going around the bend and eventually getting back there. I'm getting back there.
No, it's all good, Coach. This is great.
The original question was, how do you deal with that messiness? Well, the thing that a passerby first thinks is they're just rolling out the balls, which for those of us who have grown up on Don Meyer, Bob Knight, Pat Summitt, Dan Hayes, fundamentalist, which I am to the core, that's like the worst thing you could say about another basketball coach. You just shudder when you hear that comment. They just roll out the balls and play. But that's not what's happening. And that's the educational piece that I think you can give to people, and the part that makes it all matter. When you devise an environment where there's guided defense, and by that I mean you've got your guys in their spots to run, in their spacing spots to run your offense, and you put the defender on the high left side so that first drive, they're going to be drawing help, and everybody's moving off penetration. You get to practice that over and over and over and over again. The defense is going to help differently. Players are going to move at different paces. Things are going to change because of the environment. But if you were just rolling the ball out and playing up and down, that situation might present itself 2 times in a 4-minute interval. So you're not really getting to work on it. So it's not like you're just playing free fall. You're playing with a very specific objective. There's something that you're trying to get multiple reps at in all kinds of different ways, because you're creating an environment that is just like the game that they will see. It's not unlike Brazilian soccer, and they have that really small little court, or I guess
futsal, futsal.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is,
yeah.
where they get 10 times as many touches as they would get on a big field. That's what you're doing. You're increasing the number of opportunities for them to learn how to navigate the environment.
Well, I think the big fear for coaches is that you're going to sacrifice the coaching points that you want to get across. That, in these small-sided games or in this experiential situational situations, that, you're not going to get the coaching points. So when you do the 1-on-0 drill, you do the 2-on-0 drill, you're coaching the fundamentals. But as you've alluded to, and as we say all the time, the decision is more important than the skill anyways. So putting them in those decision-making situations is going to increase their game transfer more than anything. So I love how you're saying it, but go.
Coaches are notorious tellers. Like, we are so good at telling. We are so good at it. You think about it. I want your foot here. I want your thumb here. I want your shoulder here. By trade, it's just like, that's our deal, right? Well, I think it needs to be a little less our deal, and questions should maybe be a whole lot more our deal. But the way I translate that into our experiential learning or our environments that we create is I try to nudge and lure a whole lot more than I push and pull. And I think they're different. I want to nudge a situation so that the player can figure it out on their own, instead of me hammering them over the head with what just happened. If they learn it and feel it because they were in the middle of it, boy, they're going to remember it. If I tell them, they might not. I memorized all the presidents of the United States once. Couldn't tell you who, any of them. Don't even ask me beyond George Washington right now. Don't even ask me. I just think that when you're in the middle of something and you experience it, it becomes a part of your DNA as an athlete, and it translates.
Well, it's what you said already about the difference between memorizing and learning. And there's a big difference between those two things. So sure. People will ask, and I love the term nudging. Can you explain how you actually do that? What's nudging in your practice?
Nudging might be, where did you drive it the last 3 times in our guided defense, where we're working on moving off penetration? When you drove it baseline the last 3 times, what did you notice? Well, it got deflected one time, and then the other time I threw a drift pass, and then I got stopped up the last time. I didn't have anywhere to go with it. Okay, what's something that could happen when you get stopped up? Why did you get stopped up? And so I'm just softly nudging them toward, like giving them a direction. It's almost like when we used to play that little game, you're hot, you're trying to find something, cold, cold, cold. No, you're warmer, you're hotter, you're getting closer to that thing that you're looking for. I just try to send them in a direction and let them find it. And that's question asking, and I'm not near as good at it as I wish I was, or as I want to be. But I think you do the same thing with luring. Like, what did you see? What did you see? We'll run it again. Tell me what you saw this time. What did you see? What did you notice? And you just kind of inch them toward finding the answer for themselves.
Well, and we, again, for coaches, we have this tradition of telling you what you did wrong and then giving you the answer and giving you the correction. I think for a number of reasons. One, sometimes we want to prove how smart we are. So it becomes more like a coaching clinic than a player development situation. But the other reason is because it's faster.
Totally. And that's the biggest snag. For me as a coach and for our staff, I will have to say, I know you're wanting to get through this. And I know it's driving you crazy when you ask these kids a question and it's 15, 20 seconds before anybody says anything. And then when they do say something, then you got to ask another question. And so we're looking at, it took 3 minutes to get to this thing that you could have done in 15 seconds, right? Well, the difference in that is you can do it in 15 seconds. They won't remember it tomorrow. If you give them that 2 or 3 minutes, they're going to remember it for the rest of their time as an athlete because they had to find it. We remember what we feel. And when we have to search for things internally, it's what our mind is doing. It's searching when we ask questions. When we have to find that ourselves, it becomes a part of us and we remember it.
Well, silence is awkward. Like silence is uncomfortable for coaches. And it's what and I'll circle back to kind of something you said before, which is almost you have to give a disclaimer that people watch your practice, give them a disclaimer saying, this is what, and I do this. Anyone comes to our practice, I say, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And it's real simple. It's but it's the same for players. You have to give them a disclaimer saying it's okay. The silence is okay. And your example, your assistant coaches as well have to know, hey, it's okay. Silence is part of the process.
Oh, we preface a lot of our practices with, if people are around, this ain't going to be pretty. I get to say ain't because I'm a former English teacher, but this ain't going to be pretty, but it's going to be effective. And that's what we want anyway. And I think too, and maybe it's a lot of the players that I recruit because I'm drawn to high achieving kids who excellence is important to them in all areas, not just in basketball, but there's some permission that goes with that. If you're willing to run a messy practice, then you're kind of giving some of those perfectionists permission to screw up, that it's not, this is part of the norm is what you're doing. You're building an environment that says making mistakes is part of the norm. It's part of who we are as human beings, which we tell them all the time, but showing them is different from telling them. And so if we're willing to live with some of that awkwardness and messiness, then they're more apt to allow themselves to do that as well. I asked our players yesterday after practice, let's think about the previous day's practice, which we do a ton. And I think that it's so important to reflect. I just think it's almost as important as the practice that you went to that you're reflecting on. Because when you go through that process of what worked, what didn't work, how could we do it differently, why was it good when it was good, that's when the real stick comes in. That's that you're anchoring it to something. So I asked our guys, what went well yesterday? And there's that, 15, 20 seconds when they're thinking. And I said, that's good. You're getting better right now. Right now, you're getting better. And they start thinking about the things that went well. And then when they started talking about the things that didn't go so well, I said, so describe that to me. What did it feel like? And a couple of them started saying, well, I don't think we were doing this and doing this. I said, I appreciate the why. I do. And we're going to get to that. But right now, I just want you to tell me what it felt like. And so the words started to come out: sticky, awkward, uncomfortable, clunky, all kinds of words like that came out. And I didn't even have to say anything beyond that. By the end of when everybody was throwing their adjectives out, heads started bobbing and they had solved their own problem. They knew what had happened. They might not be able to write a sentence about it or tell you, but they internally felt what was going on with our offense, went out on the floor, took care of it. Clunkiness gone, awkwardness gone, everything much more smooth, much more fluid, much more comfortable. They fixed it because they identified it. I don't think if I had identified it for them, they would have fixed it nearly as quickly.
It's a great story and great point to keep coming back to is the impact that players being in control of their learning can have on your team's development and your individual player development. The other part, Coach, you said the speed of your team's progressions this year with so many young players. And the other point that I want to point out that ties in what we just talked about, and then that is that you're not wasting any time in practice on stuff that doesn't happen in the game. So you do actually have more time to be able to use questions, to have those moments of silence, because as you said, you refer to them as the chunking drills, that you've got rid of a lot of those drills that are just literally a waste of time, that they take away from these learning moments.
Yeah, Pete Carril said, be good at things that happen a lot. I ask our guys the first day of every practice every year, what happens a lot in basketball? And some of them will say, rebounding. And I'm like, yes, if teams don't turn it over, you're right. That does happen a lot. They'll come out with several things, and I have to ultimately guide them or lure them toward what really happens a lot. And somebody will say, you run. Yes, you do. You run to this end, and then you turn around and you run back to the other end, and then you turn around and you run back to the other end. So why don't you practice getting good at that? Because if you're really good at that, we got a chance. If you're not, we're probably going to always be trying to work from behind. And so as a coach, are we really practicing things that happen a lot? Are we really getting good at the things that happen a lot? And in order to be able to answer yes to that question, you have to be able to teach with context. I mean, I don't know of any area of our life in which context is not of supreme importance. If you and your wife have a conversation, if you don't know the context of what she's talking about, you're probably going to get in an argument or completely be on different pages, and something bad is going to happen. Every interaction that we have demands some context. And yet, if we're teaching all the time on air or all the time in a drill, then we don't supply the context for our players for them to be able to learn from it. And I do think that there is a time and a place for chunking. And I'm very clear with our players about this when they arrive in the summer. I'll give you a perfect example. I have a kid who, a great player, came in as a freshman. Shooting form was not good. A right-handed shooter, shot on the left side of her face. That's a problem. We got to fix that. Never going to be consistent. So the first thing we had to do was get buy-in from her. Are you willing to fail in the immediate future to really excel in the distant future? Yes, I am. That's what I want to do. Okay, then you have to trust us to start back at square one. This kid did a ton of chunking. She's one-hand killer shots, trying to train her muscle memory pattern. Then I'm tossing it to her, and she's just shooting, trying to get 4 beats to her shot and keep it on the right side of her face. Then she's running the line, elbow to elbow. And this progression started last year during the season. It went all the way through the summer. She's building a technique. And in order for her to ever be able to be successful with that technique in context, she has to first have the technique. And that took a while. With a shot, it takes a while. Ball handling, if a kid can't dribble, they have to learn how to dribble. But being able to, and I'm the queen of ball handling. I could wrap it around my waist and between my legs like nobody's business, but I don't think I ever did that in a game. And so being able to take that skill of the ball being an extension of your hand and put it into context is the important part. So as a further example, in today's practice, actually, Chris, we were talking about patient pivots. When you drive and defense converges, you don't know where to go. Take your time, reverse pivot. You've always got someone following. You can kick it there. They can back cut. We were talking about how we've done that a couple of times, but our footwork has been really lousy on the patient pivot. So we're spending 60 seconds today. Every guard in line goes through and gets the footwork right on the patient pivot, the reverse pivot. And then immediately it goes to context, where there's not 5 defenders, not 5 offensive players, but maybe there's 3 defenders and 2 offensive players, or vice versa. And they're driving, and now they're reading, is your teammate open in the crack? If she is, you throw it to her. If not, she back cuts, you lay it down, and there we have it. So we'll use that chunking for very specific purposes to make sure that our technique is solid. But the moment that technique is solid, you throw it in the ocean of context, and that's where the skill really develops, because skill is doing the right thing at the right time. And if you don't have context, how can you ever develop that?
That's great. And just to bring it home for some people that listen frequently, when coach refers to chunking, I refer to that as block practice. Some people refer to it as myelination, which is wrapping the myelin around. All these words are pretty much synonymous with what we're saying. And there's value to that, obviously, in isolated skills training, particularly with shooting. But by and large, as fast as possible, we want to give them context, which is great. I also want to circle back, Coach. You said what happens a lot in the game, run. But that doesn't imply conditioning. What that implies is that you're going to play the game full court. Coach, I have to say this. There is an overemphasis or perhaps insanity with conditioning from basketball coaches, that there's just so much. I went to 2 practices recently, NCAA practices, and both coaches, within 5 minutes of practice, when kids were making mistakes, the first thing they said is, we're not in shape. We're making mistakes because we're not in shape in the first 5 minutes of practice. And I know how much conditioning happens at the NCAA level. So it's not what you're saying. You're not saying conditioning. So
no, not at all. I'm talking way more about the urgency to recognize the moment at which you need to get from one end to the other. That's what it is. It's not about their physical conditioning. It's our team has the rebound, first 3 steps, getting out and going the other way. And it's funny, if we talk a lot about first 3 steps, and I tell my guys, Very rarely. Sometimes they'll take 3 hard steps and maybe you see them on film slow up a little bit. Typically that happens though, because there was a deflection in the backcourt or the ball's not, a shot went through the net and rolled away and the ref had to go get it. There's a reason for all that. But what you do see all the time, if you're not really observant and training it, is the second it becomes your possession, there's like this lapse of maybe 1, 2, 3 seconds even before a player decides, oh, I need to run down there. And then once they decide, they run pretty hard. It's that, we call it the gap. I went to Wimbledon a couple of years ago, and you walk out and it says, mind the gap. Everywhere you go, you're going to try to take the subway or whatever you call it, and it says, mind the gap. We call that the gap. We want to constantly be minding the gap, that moment at which you have to decide, because this game of basketball is about speed, and it's about speed of your decisions, not of your physical body. So we want to be fast deciders, quick deciders, astute deciders. And that's about being aware of that moment, the moment at which you need to turn and run.
Well, that's great. I love that, because I did want to circle back, because I knew a lot of coaches interpreted run as conditioning, and that's not at all. And I assume within your practices, you do a lot of full court, you do a lot of transition, whether it's small-sided games or 5-on-5 or whatever it is. That's a part of your process? Absolutely.
We've found that, sometimes you need to work on your half court. Maybe you're trying to run a set when you got to have a 3, and we're very much motion heavy as opposed to set plays. But you need plays for certain situations. The other team's best defender got her 3rd foul. You want to get her in her 4th. You want to run an ISO. How are you going to get it? So when we're working on those things and maybe polishing them in the half court, the crazy thing about human behavior, Chris, you can work on that and you can tell your team this is what we're focusing on. You got to get back in defensive transition, but we're going to practice half court here. If you do that for 5-6 minutes, you will see evidence of them not sprinting back on defense after they play offense immediately when you go back live. It's immediate. It's human behavior. You're either training it to happen or training it not to happen. There's no such thing as like sitting on a bike and it not going anywhere. Something's happening there. And so even when we're working on, we got to figure out, we got to run this play exactly right. And it's all plays are nuanced. So you got to practice that timing of how we're going to get this guy ISO'd. All right. No matter what happens when that shot is taken, make or miss, they've got to sprint back to the other end of the floor. Maybe everybody else doesn't go with them. Maybe they're just sprinting back, and we do skeletal matchups where they just sprint back full check. I got full check, and I got strong side, and I got half check, and then they're done. But if you don't make them do that, and my kids, I have great kids. I mean, well-intentioned pleasers, guys who are trying to do everything right all the time. It's not their fault. When we work in that half court and we let them be finished when it's finished, and we let them meander or stroll to the side, we're training that kind of behavior, and we have to be aware of that. And we can't punish kids when they're then not good at it because we've put them in that situation.
That's great, Coach. Part of the value I hope for coaches with these podcasts is I sometimes get alerted to a word you use, and I want people to know what you mean. Full check, half check. Explain.
Yeah, our half check is the guy that stops the ball in defensive transition. So we think 2 things are of primary importance: stop the ball, protect the basket. So our half check gets the ball at half court or thereabout. Our full check's job is responsible for taking away the basket. And then we like the strong side to be denied as much as possible, because obviously that allows your full check a little bit more knowledge when it comes to bumping out when the post guy gets there. They don't have to decide the entire court. They have a half of the court to get to. And I got to say, we're not very good at that yet, but it's a work in progress.
That's great. No, I love those words. So I wanted to make sure we define them for coaches. You kind of brought up the concept of consequences. And this is a hard thing. I have a hard time with it. Not because it's ingrained in the culture, but sometimes you just have to make a quick point. And we would never do it out of punishment. We would do it out of, hey, listen, we can be better. We can reach more. We can be better in this process. But I've talked to skill acquisition theorists or leaders or whoever they may be, and nobody ever has a good example of what a good consequence is when people aren't doing the things you want within this messy approach. Because again, it's really hard to define what's good or bad sometimes within this approach. Do you have any thoughts on that, Coach?
I think this is one of the most interesting topics we could dive into, and I want to learn more about it as well. I will tell you what I believe and what has helped us. I'm a late acquiring tennis player. I jumped into tennis when my youngest child got her driver's license, and I was no longer taking children to school. It was like a rite of passage. Like, there's a void here. What am I going to do? I was either going to learn to play the piano or learn to play tennis. I called both. Tennis coach called me first. Will never learn to play the piano. I'm all in the tennis thing. So I learned this from my tennis coach. If we're playing and we're playing ground stroke games and I try to hit a sharp angle and I miss it, he would say, maybe it had happened 2 or 3 times while we're playing. He would say, okay, I'm going to hit you this ball and I want you to hit that angle shot 3 times. So he would hit it to me. I hit the angle shot, hit the angle shot, hit the angle shot. Boom, we go right back to playing. Helped me so much. It was so good, first of all, to be the athlete learning instead of the coach teaching for a little bit. It's just been great for my coaching because I felt that. I felt myself put that skill in its proper context, and I felt some confidence with that. So one of the things we will do if, let's say, we're doing half-court offense and we're facing a lot of pressure on the wing and we're trying to work on that backdoor pass and they've turned it over 3 times in a row, I might just stop everybody and put that denial defender out there and have the guy with the ball dribble at them to shorten the pass and have that wing receiver cut hard to the basket and they'll throw it down. Maybe 3 quick times. Boom, 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 boom. And then we go right back to playing and we move on. Is it a consequence? Well, yeah, because we had to stop and they had to learn, and maybe it's awkward for a minute. Maybe if a kid is not very confident, then they feel a little bit weird about that. But what they learn real quickly is that it's an opportunity to get better at the thing I screwed up at. So how many times do we don't block out and we make them run? What does that have to do with blocking out? You know, if they don't block out, they need to practice blocking out. If they miss a layup, they go to a side goal and do 10 Mikan and get right back on Mikan being the right left,
yep.
You know, and then get right back in the throes of practice, because we want the quote unquote consequence to fit the behavior that is desired. It doesn't make any sense. It's not I don't know a coach in America really who wants to provide a consequence because they want their athletes punished. What they want is for their athletes to change their behavior. That's what we all want. And so how can we design that? Well, the tough part of that is now this practice is taking a long time. This practice that already has these awkward pauses because we're asking questions and has this messiness. Now it's taking even longer because it's got to be 3 times. So can you do it every time a kid makes a mistake? Of course not. You have to decide what's really important to you, which is the hardest work there is as a coach. If everything's important, then by definition, nothing is. So we have to decide at the outset what is most important to us. So a very vivid example of that for us is, and our team did this at the start of the year, we absolutely have to play with abandon. We're not very big. We're not going to overpower anyone. And so for us to be successful, we're going to have to play with abandon. We define that. The kids define that. Me asking them questions. What does that mean? We dive on the floor after loose balls. We cut hard. We run in transition every time. They define all these things. So we're going to play with abandon. We're going to communicate. We absolutely have to communicate. And we're going to be great responders, i.e. great teammates. So we're going to give and receive feedback is what that means. So those 3 things are like, maybe you could define them as the axis of our culture. Like they're the anchor point of everything else that we do. So if we fail in our attempt to have those 3 things as a part of anything that we do, there is a consequence of 5 push-ups. Okay? I don't yet know how you create an environment well, I do, but it would take too long for responding. Okay, so a player says, I need you to run your right lane. And the player that's being spoken to rolls her eyes and walks away. Bad response. Epic fail. So you could have the role play and do that again, or you could create a situation where there definitely is going to be a failure and somebody has to respond to that. It takes a long time. So we just started at the outset by saying, you just don't break these 3 rules. These 3 things are part of who we are. And if you do that, you owe me 5 push-ups. Well, we've had days where, as the whole team probably did 500 push-ups over the course of a 2-hour practice. A little one here, a little one there, a whole 5, epic fail right there. You didn't take the floor with urgency, all 5 of you. And so we're constantly 5 push-ups, 5 push-ups, 5 push-ups. The thing about 5 push-ups is, A, it's quick. B, they can think and listen and pay attention while they're doing it if another group is going. And it's just enough of a prick of their soul, of their consciousness, that it hurts them, but it doesn't kill them. And it's just, that's all we want them to do is just, if you lean on a hot stove, it hurts. And so you don't do it again. You pull your hand back. It's just a little bit of a hot stove to say, don't go there. Don't do that. So now in our practices, we're 20 in. We don't very often have to say 5 push-ups. They do it themselves. They just know. It might be teammate to teammate. The teammate might even, I was talking to one yesterday, like, how was your response right there? What did I ask you to do? And they just said, yes, ma'am, went to the side and did 5 push-ups. They knew. I don't ever have to even say it anymore. But it can't be for everything. It can't be for every block out and every turnover and every poorly read screen and every time you don't jump to the ball. There's just no way. And so that's why I say the hardest work we do as coaches is deciding what's important. I tell them all the time, we're going to mess up on every single possession. Somebody's going to do something that's not exactly right. That's not what we're talking about. We're just saying you can't violate these 3 core habits because they're what make us who we are, and we build from those. So beyond that, our consequences are pretty slight. And if you walk in our gym, you're not going to say, oh man, she kills them when they turn it over. Because I don't. We move on and try to figure out how to not turn it over.
It's great. I love, the main thing there that you, to summarize, is quick. Whatever it is, it's quick because it takes away from learning time. And that's really your example with blocking out or denial or whatever they screw up. You recreate the situation. And it struck me as you were saying that for a player, being coached is a consequence, but it's a positive consequence. They sometimes misconstrue it as negative, but it's really a positive consequence. And in and of itself, as you said, that's a moment to be able to help your team within the context of what you're teaching. So that's great stuff. And I'm going to steal prick of the soul. That I've never heard that before. So that's awesome. Coach, by the way, Doug Novak, who was on the podcast, tremendous coach, he started playing tennis. And we never got into that conversation because we ran out of time. But he was a nationally ranked tennis player at the University of Tennessee, I believe. And he was an assistant tennis coach before he was a head basketball coach. So he has a lot of theory. So we'll have all 3 of us get together one time and discuss that.
Absolutely. And I'll just throw this out while we're talking about tennis. A fantastic book about tennis, and the title of the book, and I have it on the corner of my desk at my house. It just I give it to everyone, and now I can't think of the name of the book.
Is it The Inner Game of Tennis?
The Inner Game of Tennis. Thank you very much. Zach will be so mad at me for
no, that's all right.
that title, but an amazing book for really anybody, not just coaches.
Yeah, no, it's a great book. So, Coach, I've got to ask, playing a lot of one-on-one seems to be a part of your philosophy as well. And again, I'm a huge believer, especially at the youth level. And I want all these podcasts to translate to different people. And I think everything you've said translates at all levels. But one-on-one, I just think youth coaches couldn't do anything better for players than play a ton of one-on-one. Even if they're completely unskilled players, they'll learn more about the game by playing one-on-one than doing anything one-on-0. What are your reasonings or rationale behind what a lot of one-on-one at your level?
Well, I'll start with this. When I was a first-year high school coach in 1990, I was a head basketball coach at Norman High School. We played a great girls basketball program just up the road at Moore, Oklahoma. Legendary coach John Nobles. He had been a 6-on-6 coach, high school girls in Oklahoma were 6-on-6 forever. We were like the ones that went kicking and screaming to 5-on-5 finally. I'll never forget the first year that we played him, and he was, I thought I was, playing John Wooden. I walk across to say, "Hi, Coach Nobles, how are you today?" before the game. And he was standing with his arms crossed, and he said, "Sherri, how much you playing one-on-one?" And I said, "Well, we do it a couple times a week." He said, "Play one-on-one every single day." I said, "Yes, sir." And that was about it. Then he beat us by about 30 and went on about our business. But that stuck with me because he had been incredibly successful, but his players had a great feel for what to do when they caught the ball. And we're constantly saying in our practices, make the ball hard to guard, make the ball hard to guard. Well, if you play a lot of one-on-one, you know what that means and what it feels like when that's not happening. You can't be successful in one-on-one if you're not making the ball hard to guard. And so we translate that and do a lot of one-on-one in a lot of different ways. And that's the thing, I think, Chris, that's where, coaches don't give themselves enough credit sometimes for being creative. When coaches come to our practice, they'll say, "Do you have any drills for this, this, and this?" Yeah, I can give you what we do, but the very best stuff we do comes out of what we're not doing well. So we'll just say, "Man, we're not very good at this." Like if we have to catch it when we're being tightly denied and then work out of the pivot, but we're not very good at that. So we'll devise a one-on-one game that begins in that scenario so that our guys work on that a lot. If we're not very good when we fill a motion spot in the channel and the ball swung back to us, we're not very good about attacking out of that. So we'll create a one-on-one drill. We make up all kinds of things. So much so that we don't always document them well enough to remember what we did. We'll say, "Remember when we did that one-on-one thing? Why was that so good? That helped us so much." But that kind of stuff, there's a lot of ways to play one-on-one. You don't have to just line up in the middle of the floor and toss the guy the ball and go. There are so many different things you can do, from how you keep score to how you limit dribbles to what part of the floor you can play on to how you begin, all those things. And they are all contextual to things that happen in the sport of basketball.
I remember getting up freshmen in my program once, and we, one of the first things we did is play one-on-one off the wing, off the corner, some different locations. He said that was the first time he's never, that he played one-on-one, that it wasn't dead top. And I was like, he's never played point. Like, he's not a point guard. He's never played on the dead top either. So something simple like that. But the other thing you said there is how what you're not doing well dictates what you do in practice the next day. And I suggest this. I mean, you can do it at your level, but whether it's within games or within practices, if you could have someone document what you say in practice or within games, all those things that you mutter under your breath, "Oh, we're not blocking out," or we're not closing out, or whatever it is, that's what you do the next practice. Because those are the things that obviously are significant enough to you that you find annoying, problems, whatever they are, that dictate your next practice. And so many of those things come through in one-on-one.
You're spot on. And one of the things our staff does is immediately following practice, we have it might take 10 minutes download where we all just throw out, "Boy, we weren't very good at this today. I got so frustrated when this happened. I don't feel like we got what we wanted out of this drill." And I just sit at a little laptop and just take everything as it said, spit it out to each one of them. And then we have the evening to sort of live with that, check the film, see if it's relevant, see if we really felt appropriately about what we thought we, I always say it's never as good or bad as you think. Sometimes you'll leave practice and go, we threw it all over the yard. And then you watch film and you're like, we really didn't. We were learning because the defense was forcing us into some situations we haven't been in before. So it wasn't that bad. So that, again, that retracing, that reflecting of what you do. And I'm fortunate at this level, and we sort of touched on this at the beginning when my video coordinator was helping hook me up with you today. I got a lot of people. And so I can walk by my graduate assistant in practice and say, tomorrow we need to self-select the rebounder instead of coaches selecting it. Or tomorrow we got to do more threshold catches because our trigger reads are bad. And we don't know, we're not making good decisions about whether to shoot or drive. And so I can spout those off and they're being gathered for me. And I know a lot of coaches at other levels, you don't have that luxury.
But you can always find a parent. I always say, put a parent on your team. in terms of making them an ally, and ask them to do it if it's a youth practice or something, because inevitably they're going to hang around anyways.
That's a great idea.
So have something like that. But you're right. I mean, sometimes it's resources, but sometimes it's just finding a creative solution too. Coach, if I could, and if you can address it, if you have a little bit more time here, I've heard that you do something called a defensive boot camp at the beginning of the season. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Well, I can tell you about it, but we don't do it anymore.
Okay. So was that a chunking thing? Is that something you got rid of?
Yes, it was chunking, but it was more environmental chunking, because it wasn't at the beginning. It was, this is what a closeout is. This is what a denial is. This is what active hands look like. But it was.
Was it more educational?
It was more educational.
Okay.
And the premise of it being, and this is probably great that you brought this up, because this is the crux of everything that we're talking about. I'm really glad you brought this up. We did a defensive boot camp for the purpose of drawing our players' attention to the importance of it, getting them to fall in love with it. We were negotiating for their buy-in in terms of, you got to guard to be good at this level. And kids typically, I mean, occasionally a recruit will tell you, I love to guard. Typically when they tell you that, they're lying. Kids just don't. That's not the deal.
They're all lying when they say they love to play.
Yeah, they just, yeah. So you're trying to make it fun and find a way to get them to fall in love with it. But in all honesty, what we were really doing is we were wanting to feel really good about how we were teaching defense. Because in that week of boot camp, we were good at guarding. We were really good at guarding. And then we got out of boot camp and we went to regular practice, where you play offense and then you play defense, and then there's a free throw, and then there's an inbound, and then you play offense and you play defense. And we weren't good anymore. It's like my golf game. If I go to the range and hit my driver 40 times, I get really good at it. But then I go play around the golf, and then maybe there's a short hole, and then I got to hit, there's a long hole, and I hit driver, and then an iron and another iron, and I'm not really good, so I may hit a couple more, and then you putt, and then you get back to your driver, and you don't have that feel of going over and over and over. Well, I think the music professor at Juilliard would call that interleavened practice, where you practice one thing, you practice another thing, you practice another thing, you go back and forth, so you're constantly reaching for that information. Well, that's what basketball is. You don't play defense possession after possession after possession after possession, unless you're lousy and you're turning over all the time. So you have to figure out how to practice exactly what happens in a game. So while a boot camp, as I look back on it, would be really good for the education of a skill. This is a closeout. This is a jump to the ball. This is a denial. This is how you switch a screen. Introduction to concepts. I get that. That would be a great way in a short amount of time to introduce that. But as quickly as possible, you have to weave in the context and then interleaving it with what actually happens in a game.
No, that's tremendous. And when you say interleaving, I mean, random practice, mixing other terms that are used in that way. And I brought it up because I saw a few programs this year do defensive walkthroughs at the beginning of practice. And then the Houston Rockets, at least last year they did it, where they do these defensive, I don't want to call them shells, because shells has this stereotypical thing, but where they put them in a situation and it's their warm-up. It's a defensive warm-up where they're 3-on-3 in a defensive warm-up, where again, the offense isn't live. It's just this movement of jump into the ball, back screen comes, or communication cues, all these different things. And I was just curious what it was in your world, but it's just a fascinating thing about how to get those slow learning reps sometimes.
I love that.
Those slow learning reps.
I'm going to dig into some of that. I love the idea of playing, having a defensive rehearsal. And it is, we talk a lot about guided defense for our offense. Yeah. It is hard to flip that. I find it super easy to guide my defense to get what I want for my offense. I find it very difficult to flip it and guide my offense to get what my defense needs. So an example would be random ball screens. You have to set 3 ball screens before you go score. There's some low-hanging fruit like that that's pretty easy to figure out. But when you get into the deeper idiosyncrasies of what happens within defensive possessions, I think you got to spend some time trying to figure out what that environment would look like to get those reps of that thing that happens a lot.
And you're right. And what brought it home to me is kind of how I would always do scouting report, which we would never do on air scouting report. Like it just didn't ever make sense to work through someone's offense that we don't run without our defense. And I was like, so yeah, for the past few years, we've been doing a lot more slow learning reps with the defense as the focus. And,
I like that terminology. I'm going to steal that, slow learning reps.
Please, I've already stole a whole bunch of things from you as well. So no, Coach, I can't thank you enough, first of all, and I hope at some point we'll get to talk a little bit even deeper. But what hopefully everyone has noticed is how deeply you've thought about these things, and from the art or the craft of coaching. I think people, hopefully through these podcasts, have gotten appreciation, whether you agree or disagree with the coach, just about how deeply people like you and thought leaders in the game have thought about things. And I think it's tremendous that you've been able to share these concepts. So thank you so much for that. And I don't know if you have any last thoughts to share, but.
Well, I just want to say how much I appreciate you and the site. I've learned a lot from the site. I love getting to hear from D3 coaches, D2 coaches that I would never have access to because maybe they don't have the platform of a big Nike clinic or whatever the conduit might be. There are just so many great coaches, and you're giving us access to those people. And I've learned a ton, and I'm energized by it. I'll listen sometimes when I'm jogging in the evening, and I'll think, I love that, and I'll think, I don't love that, and here's why. And that makes me as much of a better coach as the ones where I love and I try to steal it. It's that process of thinking through it, and it's just a great resource. And I'm just sorry that you and I have never had a conversation before it's a live podcast. We need to actually talk ball more.
It's unbelievable. I know. And it's not from a lack of effort to a certain extent, but we'll make that happen. And as I said, at some point, I hope to get down there and see you guys practice live too, because I'm simpatical with so many things that you say that I look forward to seeing that.
Well, you are welcome anytime. And thanks again for helping grow our great game.
Because you're jumping back into the gap. Outlet's a coach. It's either sideline, 2 on the side, 3 on the side. That's off the second cut.